My name is Christy Caniff. I'm here in the village of Craigs in County Galway. I'm standing beside the Derry Hippo River, and right behind me here is the Craigs Bridge over the Derry Hippo River. This particular bridge is shown on the first edition Northern Survey map of 1839, so it predates that particular time. We're not fully sure when it was constructed, but certainly here in the 1830s, 1840s. The river itself here was canalised, straightened and modified by Alan Pollock. Pollock was a Scottish merchant who bought up thousands of acres of encumbered estates here in County Galway after the famine. Essentially what happened was a lot of the local landlords would have gone broke during the famine period and after the famine. Their lands were put up for sale. Pollock bought extensive estates around Craigs and this part of County Galway, and also bought estates back down around Ballinasloe and Lardenstown in that area. Also in the same area, we have a small biodiversity park here that was developed by the local community. The area is right beside the river, so we can actually hear birdsong in the background. It's also adjacent to the local national school, so it functions both as an amenity and as a learning space, right within the village itself. Craigs is a relatively small village, but yet if we examine the architecture here, we find that there's some very interesting houses with particular features on them that I suppose is part of the streetscape and part of the significance of the village. For example, the house behind me here is a lovely 19th century house, and if you look at the kind stones, they're the stones at the corners of the walls. You'll see that they're dressed in a particular way. They're actually made in plasterwork, and if you look at the decoration, it appears to be a form of vermiculation. And of course, vermiculation is a design that copies worm casts on that. So in this case, what you get is maybe a more naive form of that. Also, above the windows here in this particular house, you'll see a particular type of hood moulding, also executed in plaster. The single-storey house to the left is the last surviving vernacular house in the village of Craigs. It has a corrugated roof today, but this house would originally have had a thatched roof. Also, if you look at the facade, you'll see there are 3 small windows and the door. Also evidence in the roof itself of where the chimney was. And when we look at the juxtaposition of the chimney and the door, we'll actually know that this was a direct entry house. In other words, you could walk straight into the kitchen. It was also associated with a blacksmith's forge. A family of Murrays undertook blacksmithing here in the past. The green building behind me here was a former public house. It's decorated in a form of Art Deco style. If you examine it, you'll see that there's some very fancy patterns around the top and around the edge as a form of architrave, and also a moulding that runs right across the 2 windows flanking the central doorway. So it's one of the interesting features of the streetscape here in Craigs. This pair of houses was built in the second half of the 19th century by Pollock, the local landlord, for some of his workers. One is shown in limestone, exposed limestone, and the other has been plastered. The classical cornice is another very fine example of moulded plasterwork here in the village of Craigs. The premises of Craigs Rugby Club was a former RIC barracks. The barracks was burnt in the 1920s during the War of Independence by the local IRA. This building was a former shop. It has an interesting gable insofar as it's stepped, and also incorporated into the gable, we can actually see a shrine to the Sacred Heart. Michael Kilby's is another very fine example of a shop front, very well kept and maintained. A single-storey house next door to Michael Kilby's is another fine example of vernacular house. The streetscape in the village is very much in vogue with the 19th and 20th century, but at the same time all coming together to form a perfect street pattern. We're at the Charles Stewart Parnell Heritage Centre in Craigs. This building was officially opened in 1991. It had been restored prior to that. The original occupants of the building were the Chadwells, also known as the Southwells. They were blacksmiths and iron workers for the Pollock estate. Some of the gates that we find around the village were actually made by them in Pollock's time. Alan Pollock built a small church here for a small colony of Presbyterians that he brought over from Scotland as estate workers. The church still stands today, though it's missing its roof. Charles Stewart Parnell addressed a meeting here in Craigs in 1891. A monument was erected here in 1946 by the then Taoiseach Eamon de Valera. One famous son of Craigs was Richard Luke Quincannon. He was born here in 1747. He was ordained and went on to become a bishop. He was actually the first Catholic bishop of New York in 1808, and he died in 1810 on his way back from Naples to New York. We started at the river, and it's appropriate that we actually stop again at the village pump. Back in the day, this would have provided drinking water to the households of the village. But equally as important, it would have formed a focal point within the village. People would have met here, they would have exchanged stories and gossips. They probably all happened around this. So it would have been quite central within the community itself. Today it's relegated to the function of a piece of decorative ornament within the streetscape. So it is a very important element within the cultural story of any village.